Hello, my name is Eva and I run the account Notation is Great on Twitter. So today I'm going to talk about organ tablatures, and maybe if you've had a look at my account before, you will have seen that I've made a couple of videos on lute tablatures. So tablatures can be written for many different types of instruments, and each tablature will follow its own system in a way. But basically what makes tablatures different from staff notation is that tablatures tend to be more practical, so staff notation tends to be more abstract. Tablatures tend to tell you what to do. And so, as I said in these other videos, there are different types of tablatures from different instruments, and perhaps the best known ones are plucked string instruments, but there are also tablatures for violins, accordions, and so on. So with organ lute tablatures, we are talking about the period that goes from the late Middle Ages to the Baroque era, more or less. So the first organ tablatures date from the late Middle Ages, of the 14th century. This tablature that we can see here is actually from the 15th century, so 1460s and 70s. It's the so-called Buchsheimer Orgelbuch. So at that time, it was quite common for organ books to be compilations of pieces by different authors, including vocal pieces that have been arranged for the organ. And the most salient feature of organ music is perhaps that it's written for several voices, so it's a polyphonic texture. So the Buchsheimer Orgelbuch is actually a bit unusual because it's a mixture of staff notation and tablature. So here the upper voice is written in staff notation and the two lower voices are written in tablature. So if we have a look at the staff notation first, we have a staff, which is 7 lines, and we have a clef, we have a C clef. So it's actually, there are a lot of elements in this staff notation that we can recognize. It starts to become quite similar to present day notation. There's also bar lines, which we don't always have at this time, so it's really useful. And we also have note values. So we have 3 main types of note values in this passage and indeed in most of the Orgelbuch. So the first 4 notes that we can see here, so they have a stem and a flag, so they are connected to each other by a flag. And note that the very last note of the 4 also has its own flag, which in contemporary notation has disappeared, but this time it's still pretty much there. So these notes are semi-minims, and typically a group of 4 will be 1 beat, okay? The next note, which is just a head with no stem or flag, is a semi-brevis. Okay, and 4 semi-minims are 1 semi-brevis, so that's still again 1 beat, another beat. The next note value that we've got here is a head with a stem, but not a flag, and that's a minim, okay, and a minim is half of a semi-brevis, and it's also 2 semi-minims, okay, so that's half a beat. And you can see here that the second half of that same beat is 2 semi-minims. And if you look at the second bar here, we have a dot as well, which has the same meaning as our dot in present day notation. So it's already starting to look a lot like our present day notation. If you look at the lower voices, this the tablature per se. So if you are from an English-speaking country, you probably know that the notes have the names of letters in English. So it's the same in German, okay? So A, B, C, etc. With the exception of B in English is H in German, and B in German is what we call B flat in English. So that's you need to remember that. So we also have other things to note, which is how do you indicate different octaves? Well, typically you use uppercase to signify that the note is lower, so it's in the lower octaves. And you also use horizontal lines on top of the notes, and which means they are taken an octave up. So that's what you need to know. And if you look at the letters as well, you will see that there are dots and vertical lines on top of them. So these are the note values. Okay, so a dot is a minim, a vertical line, sorry, a dot is a semibrevis, and a vertical line is a minim, and a vertical line with a flag is a semi-minim. So basically they are just copying the note values that we see in the staff notation. So here we've got a more modern tablature. So this is from 1571, and it's from a book that Bach himself owned by Elias Ammerbach. So again, a compilation of different compositions for organ. And as you can see here, the system is basically the same as in the Buxheimer Orgelbuch. So obviously here you don't have staff notation for the upper voice, but you have the tablature system for all four voices. So as you can see here, each voice is notated in its own line, and we don't have an indication of left hand or right hand. Again, the organist would know, or they would figure out how to distribute the voices between the two hands. So apart from that, it's as you can see, very similar to the Buxheimer Orgelbuch. So we have the note values indicated here. So instead of giving us the kind of full figure of the note value, we have stems and flags predominantly. And we also have letters to indicate the note, and horizontal lines on top of the notes to indicate the octaves. So obviously this is a printed tablature, so you know, if you are interested in reading this kind of literature, you might need to familiarize yourself with Gothic script, which is the one used here. So this is from the so-called Linzer Orgelbuch, which is from the 1610s, so slightly later than the previous one. And I know this looks much more confusing, but basically it's the same system. It's just that because it's handwritten, it's perhaps a bit more difficult to read. But again, you have the letters to indicate the notes, and on top of the notes, you have the note values. So those kind of small grids that you see are really note values. So for example, if you have like 4 vertical bars, this means 4 notes, and they are crossed by 3 horizontal bars. This means it's semi-quavers. So the same principle, maybe just takes a bit more practice to read. And here's another example. This is Jesu meine Freude by Dietrich Buxtehude, so the Danish-German composer. And you might have heard the story that Bach walked 250 miles when he was young to actually see Buxtehude play, because he was the greatest organist in his time. So the point here is that the organ tablatures were still pretty much used in Bach's time. So that's perhaps some of the later examples we find come from Bach's works. And going back to the Buxtehude, this looks, I know, extremely complex, extremely confusing, but it's again the same system. It's again letters to indicate the notes, and stems and flags to indicate note values. So it's just a matter perhaps of taking a bit more time, of getting used to the handwriting and so on, and spending a bit of time deciphering this tablature. So this was my very short introduction to organ tablatures, but basically you have most of what you need to know here. So now you can go and maybe try your hand at some of those incredibly complex Buxtehude tablatures. I mean, if you are bored at home one afternoon, I can guarantee it can be a lot of entertainment. So other than that, I hope you've learned something from this video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.